spellcasters alike. I am Dan. My co-host is, of course, Josh, the Earthdawn line developer.
And I'm giggling because Dan misplaced his script and couldn't find it seconds before we started recording.
I have my script. It's here somewhere in my stack of reference material. Yeah.
He may or may not edit out the sound of him slamming books around as he was looking for it.
I do the editing, so I'll do as I please. On this podcast,
it's a well-oiled operation here, folks.
Not in any way, shape, or form. From the speaking of my chair, as you can hear, not in any way. So on today's podcast,
I clean mine up before I give you my half of the audio. I clean up stuff like that.
Yeah, I took out a whole lot of coughing and whatnot the last couple times. Yeah. So on this podcast today, we'll be discussing all things magical and mechanical. In fact, the mechanics of the magical, because today's discussion is all about wizards. We did Air Sailors.
Wizards.
Did Air Sailors a couple of episodes ago.
Wizards.
Not the basketball team. Just Earthdawn spellcasters, wizards. So
yeah, people who are thrilled by our earlier Discipline episode about Air Sailor were like, oh, I guess they will be moving on to Archer next. No. We started at the beginning. Now we're jumping all the way to the end. We're going to wizards.
Back and forth in the middle, end up somewhere around Scouts. I don't know.
We'll hit them all eventually, but
yes. One at a time. So if you have any questions to ask us after we're done, or provide us any feedback if you liked it, didn't like it, or could hear me slamming books around, email us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. And with that being said, I think we should dive into the thick of things.
Yes.
It has been said that wizards are the book casters, or bookish spellcasters in Earthdawn, but none have the courage to say that to their face. So what is your take on wizards versus the other spellcasters? How's that?
Well, so the other spellcasters each have a fairly clearly defined niche that existed right from the beginning, just because of strong thematic oomph to them, for lack of a better term. the elementalists, you've got like the elements,
fire, water,
defined
wood,
as it is, air, earth, fire, water, wood, defined as that is within Earthdawn.
Mm-hmm.
Illusionists are pretty, illusionists are always difficult to play, but illusionists serve a fairly solid niche and archetype in terms of the style of magic that you would expect from one.
Pigeonhole them, yes.
Yeah. Neithermancers, again, slightly different take on Earthdawn, but they also tend to come fairly straightforward.
Yeah.
Like you know what to expect when it's Neithermancer, not Necromancer, but the imagery and stuff that goes along with them is fairly strong. So each of those three disciplines had a fairly strong magical style archetype that could easily pigeonhole them.
Mm-hmm.
Wizards, I think then were none of those three really have anything that is the traditional spellcaster that is a sage/scholar type that you would often typify with a magic using spellcasting character, specifically again as a response to Dungeons and Dragons, the wizard, the magic user,
or
setting a
Gandalf in Tolkien, the classic,
right? Gandalf, but the classic, but especially where you're getting into the latter part of second edition AD&D, and things are still kind of maybe casting a brief nod at, hey, sup, over to the Tolkien side of things,
yes,
but
totally.
Having largely developed its own genre by that point, yes. Right? And so wizards ended up being this is the spellcasting archetype that are the bookish, are the scholars and whatnot. And that, it is an archetype. It is a strong image. I think it works really well. It unfortunately does not necessarily link itself to a particularly strong style of magic.
Their spell category seems to be, and this is for mostly for Earthdawn and any of the editions, is we have a cool spell. It doesn't fall into the illusionist, Nethermancer, elementalist, so the wizards just get what's left. It's kind of neat.
Yeah,
it's kind of useful,
and and lest you think that I am down on wizards, I am not down on wizards at all.
Me neither, by the way.
Wizards, in all honesty, from a role playing and personality standpoint, are probably my favorite of the spellcasting disciplines. Although there is something that I love about all of them.
I agree.
The wizard always seemed to me to be the spellcaster that was most focused on magic as magic. Right.
Yeah.
That feels to me like what their strength should be. Mm-hmm. And they had some spells that typified that. Dispel magic, obviously. It was a spell in previous editions, was the most obvious example of that.
Oh, I see what you're doing. I'm going to undo that. Thank you.
Yeah. They're in first edition, their low circle damage spell is just is basically magic missile, basically. Mind like they're just basically chucking astral energy at the target to damage it, just magical energy, as opposed to the elementalist earth darts, the Neithermancer, who actually didn't even get a ranged attack spell until later in first edition. Their initial attack spell was Spirit Grip. It was actually a touch range spell.
Yes.
But like there were some, so it always felt to me, and especially with some of the other, especially flavor spells like Bedazzling Display of Logical Analysis, which was in the Arcane Mysteries and things like that. Like it felt to me that as scholars, as sages of a magician sage, that they should perhaps be focused on magic as magic, not necessarily focusing on the astral the way that Neithermancers really are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the potential of magic to do things in the world as opposed to being focused on the realms beyond.
Yeah.
So there is perhaps a little bit of a little bit of overlap from a like a Venn diagram of Nethermancers and wizards.
Yes.
Maybe has a little bit of that, because wizards would be interested in astral space as it allows them to manipulate the energies to do stuff here and now, and not really concerned with the denizens and residents of that space, where Neithermancers would.
Exactly. They look at astral space as a tool or a playground, and Nethermancers look at the people in that playground, or
looking at it more as an ecology than a potentially.
Good, yeah. Well put. I was going to get there eventually. I look at wizards, and I cook and I bake at home, so I look at wizards as if illusionists and elementalists and Nethermancers are cooks, they know what to do with food. I look at wizards as a chef. They will reinvent a dish. They will reinvent what to do with this ingredient. And so I look at them as the 4-star Michelin chef out there, taking a raw ingredient, doing something new with it, and broadening its horizons per se. So that's just what they want you to believe. Exactly. So with that being said, last time around when we hit Air Sailors, we kind of started with the Karma Ritual.
Yes.
And I love that their Karma Ritual, and at least the example Karma Ritual, just uses geometric shapes. Like, again, these are building blocks to them instead of just having something kind of willy-nilly. They are very focused and very precise in their Karma Ritual with drawing of shapes and exactly how to focus their attention on their magical energies and commune with their discipline and its path.
Yeah. And this is another case where the Karma Ritual is pretty much taken almost verbatim from previous editions, because the Karma Ritual is actually pretty evocative for them and pretty cool. Yeah. It is very precise and exacting, and
it ain't broken. Don't fix it.
Yeah. That's basically it. And
yeah.
So there's that aspect of it. And again, looking at patterns, one of the things that isn't really presented so much in 4th edition, but that I always liked with regards to the wizard is their, and it's not the only way to approach them, but I really did like in the Adept's Way, the write-up that was presented for them is their interest in correspondence and symbolism and like as above, so below kind of like philosophical approach to things. The realm of ideas kind of gets a little bit too like, Plato esoteric, perhaps at times, but I do really like sort of the thought of them being, okay, like this represents, like this thing represents this, and we tie them together as like intellectual ideas. There is a very strong intellectual bent to the wizard that is not present to the same extent so much in the other magician disciplines.
I concur.
Which again kind of plays into their like sage study of magic qua magic kind of thing.
Yes. Which
I would think that a lot of like the wards and protections and stuff would have been developed by nethermancers and wizards working together. The nethermancers knowing what needed to be protected from, and the wizards going, okay, well, how can we stretch the theoretical limits of what we know to be able to do this?
Yes.
There's a very sort of academic, like research-oriented flavor that goes along. I mean, we may talk about hedge wizards, which is another whole like subset of that. But the sort of default wizard is a very like intellectual, learned, very elitist, perhaps in some respects, studying magic more as a pure art as opposed to sullying it the way that some of the other.
Yeah, they're not as nitty gritty, down and dirty. They are more of the theoretical aspects. They can put them into play, absolutely, but I look at them as the theoretical aspects, and they can decipher what happened behind the scenes with that spell you just cast, which brings us to their half magic ability. They may use half magic to recognize different types of magic use, identify specific uses of wizardry, and for knowledge of magical rituals. So this plays into their knowledge versus their application of magic. So like I said, they can as being, again, go back to the chef analogy, they can taste the dish, tell you what spices you used, if this one's too bitter, too salty, too much of this herb or whatnot, if it goes well with the protein or the vegetables, the starch that you used, whatever the case may be. They can dissect that magic, and then they can go back home and they can recreate it. And so that's...
I'm now getting images of a wizard mentor a la Gordon Ramsay telling his students.
I was going Iron Chef America, but take your pick. Gordon Ramsay's good because he uses a lot of profanity from me. Because Hell's Kitchen is on Amazon and it's something that is easily like had on in the background for noise and you don't need to pay much attention to it. Yes.
It is on a lot in our household. I'm not a huge fan of it, but I can certainly see the appeal.
Absolutely.
Of the character of Gordon Ramsay in that show, because he is playing a character in large part. But that is a sidetrack. But yes, I completely recognize the like metaphor of perhaps of wizard as chef as opposed to just a cook. They certainly would like present themselves as such, as a higher level of practitioner, perhaps a bit more pure. Like the illusionist would be great if only they did not sully the magic with such mundane
childlike displays of
concepts as entertainment.
Yes, adolescent entertainment. This is not the way magic should be used. It's fine that it does, but it's not the way it should be used. So I can see a wizard coming across that and stating that as such. So really, that gets us down there into the discipline talents, because wizards do not get a free talent until
they do.
Actually, I'm sorry. Sorry.
Wizards not only get a free talent, they get 2 free talents.
Yes, but
they are both spell matrices.
This is one of the best changes I think there was, because instead of spending points on your spell matrices to circle up, you made them free.
Well, we gave.
I mean, you as the team.
We gave them. Well, yeah. It was kind of a like this grew out of the same sort of design thought that led to the free discipline, the free talents for the specialists, like craftsman and entertainer and things like that, is that, and again, this is more of a, okay, what wasn't working particularly well in 3rd edition and how can we improve on that? And one of the problems with 3rd edition is because of how it structured the discipline talents that you had to take in order to advance. Right. And because a spellcaster really, in order to work, needs matrices.
Yes.
You had to give at least one matrix as a discipline talent, because otherwise people might try and do builds where they didn't have matrices, and that's just a scary thought.
Yes.
But then, because of the way that discipline talents were set up, as these were the only things that you could spend karma on, you didn't want to give too many matrices as discipline talents, because then you're not giving them actual talents, you're just giving them spaces to hold spells. And just the whole structure of how magicians worked with regards to their matrices in the 3rd edition talent option paradigm just didn't work particularly well. And so giving them, look, you need talents. We're going to give you 2 for free. We're going to upgrade one of them to an enhanced matrix at 5th circle.
Yes.
Rather than give you additional one, we'll just upgrade one of them to an enhanced. So you have 2 matrices. You can pick up additionals with options if you want, but it's not required. And like, if you want to go with the route where you're not necessarily going to have as many spells available, but you want to focus more on talents, that's fine. Yeah. Like I think it works pretty well.
I think this is one of the more, I can't say call it radical changes, but the smartest change to a discipline to make your matrices free, circle up with you as you go, because they're based upon your circle. So they will always hold. Yeah. And there's no, because of the way that matrix casting works, where you cannot put a spell in a matrix that is higher than your circle. Yes.
There is no point in really, again, looking at the framework of how advancement works within this particular paradigm that was introduced in 3rd edition. There is no point in raising spell matrix to a higher circle. I mean, there is if you have to raise it. Obviously, you want to raise it to your new circle so that you can put spells in it. But if you are giving it for free, then it's automatic. Like if you give it for free and you automatically raise it as a free talent, you automatically raise it with the circle, then boom, you've got it. You have something that you can put your spells in and you're good to go.
Yeah.
You know, it's again, there was not anything wrong necessarily with the 1st edition way that they handled it, but it was a very different advancement in character development paradigm. And so I can understand in one sense how people who had only been exposed to 1st edition and how things worked there would come to 4th and see this as a hugely radical, like bizarre kind of thing. I mean, setting aside the whole talent options, whatever, but as a like third edition did this fairly radical change to how disciplines worked. But there were aspects of it that didn't work, which is fine because it was a new thing that was being tried. And the only way is to, test drive at 100,000 miles and see where the weak points actually show up. And then, okay, in the 4th edition, we're going to address, some of those weaknesses as best we can. And, that's where the free talents sort of grew out of that.
Yeah. So like I said, this makes the most amount of sense is your matrices just automatically increase with you. You don't spend points on them. They're done, which frees up a slot or 2 to actually pick up a talent you'd like to use and develop and spend legend points on and go from there. So this, I think, really fleshes out and further broadens the strokes of what a wizard or any spellcaster can become. And so you're not, and your choices are not as limited.
Yeah. And we went with 2 because 1 was not enough and 3 was too many. Like, I mean, that seems kind of like pat and facile.
Nope. That's exactly right.
But that's, like giving them 1 so that they would have the same number of free talents as the specialists. But that would mean that really you would need to then spend option slots to pick up extras.
Yeah. And
then 3 just for free just seems to be too many. Because then, well, okay, then are you going to be giving them, are you going to make all matrices free, or are you going to provide options? And if you're doing that, then you're at 3. Well, now you're looking at 4 or maybe 5. Like, as we discussed back in our overview of magic, of spell magic,
yes,
of spell casting, the number of matrices that a magician character has is the real sort of balance point for spellcasters in combat. And so it's, in first edition, spellcasters typically would have 3 or 4, depending on discipline, matrices of each type. And basically, so we go, okay, well, we've got 2, then we give you an option as a third. And overall, especially with the introduction of spell matrix items that happened later in first edition, I think there is less of a need for matrices to be available as actual talents, with the idea being that, well, you can just, get magic, like magician's magic items typically will have a matrix. So getting a fourth, a fourth standard matrix in your novice circles is not, so I just like, that's the numbers. That seems to be the best place to have the numbers. So,
well, and going back to first edition, when you didn't even have options at all, every spellcaster was granted 2 at first circle. That's it. Right. So the other answer can just be because that was the way it was. Just kidding. But but yeah, that's kind of where all of that kind of developed from, that same kind of design thinking of looking at third edition and saying, okay, what's not working right within the framework of the options and giving people choices. Okay, how do we make the choices themselves a little bit harder, in the sense that, oh, there are more things on the list that I want than I have space for. Okay, what am I going to take? Yeah. As opposed to, oh, there are 10 options on this list, but only 3 of them are any good, and everybody takes them. Yes. And then you're back to the same, like, cookie cutter, whatever. Yeah. So that being said, you want to cover discipline talents first or talent options? Because I think last time we did discipline talents. Let's talk about discipline talents first. That's the more important part, because that's what makes you. As a wizard. So yeah, and of course their durability. I remember the durability for spellcasters before as being a 5/4 for. No, it was 4/3. 4/3. I'm sorry. Yeah, 5/4 was the thief, but it was 4/3 for all of the spellcasters. That was 4 death rating, 3 unconsciousness rating. Yes. Fourth edition, because of the simplification of durability, since it's no longer like a talent. Yes. It's now similar to Karma Ritual, similar to the free talents. It's something that's just kind of part of the circle and advances with it. Yep. From a theory and philosophical standpoint, they kind of are, but from a gameplay standpoint, these are things that everybody needs to have, so we're just going to give them to you. Yep. But it's durability 3, because that gives it a single rating, but we duplicate the growing gap between death and unconsciousness rating by having the character's circle added into the death rating as well. So that goes up. So effectively, you are adding 3 each to death and unconsciousness rating for the durability. Yep. And then you're adding, when you go up a circle, you add an additional 1 to your death rating because your circle went up. So there's your 4/3. Exactly. I mean, we're basically like, we're recreating the same values for the most part, just presenting a slightly different way of doing it. Exactly. So by 15th circle, you'll be 15 points different on your death and unconsciousness. Right. You'll widen that gap by 15 more. So and I think I mentioned this before, but giving them at first circle, made that, now it's not something that we need to do. It does make first circle characters a little bit tougher, which is fine. Always, because you need to be a little bit tougher at first circle just to make sure you can make it to second. Because I've had some people not make it a second before. So yeah, discipline talents. We have, of course, and I'll kind of go in reverse order because these are the big D, the big U, the big H. Spellcasting and thread weaving. Ta-da! Yeah. Yep. Obviously, you need those if you're going to be a magician. So the other 3, Dispel magic, which is wonderful for wizards because that, again, goes back to their kind of half magic ability. I can figure out what spell you were using, and no thank you very much. I will dispel that. Yep. Then we go on to Patterncraft, which I believe is new. Patterncraft, which is basically the new version of read-write magic. Oh, gotcha. Right. That's basically what it is. All of the magician disciplines get Patterncraft. It's basically the ability to understand and recognize and work with patterns. It is what is used to learn new spells.
but its role is expanded a little bit to also indicate sort of like general, like your understanding of magic. Like if you are going to be using Astral Sight or something to study a magical pattern, you would roll Patterncraft to see if you understand it.
So this is like magic
so it has a little bit. It's a little bit magic theory-ish, yeah, but it's basically your understanding of and ability to work with magical patterns.
Okay, cool. I love the rewriting of that, and a nice name title as well. And then finally, research, which again lends to the whole bookish type mage versus anybody else.
I do want to take a moment here to address Dispel Magic as a talent as opposed to a spell, which it was in all previous editions. This is something that I always saw as a little bit of a weakness of the spell version of it, simply because of the way that the mechanics of the game worked. And that is that the previous versions of Dispel Magic, the effect of the spell it was a first circle spell. The effect of the spell was you would roll willpower and compare that to the dispel difficulty of the spell, which would be more difficult the higher the circle of spell.
Agreed.
Or talent, because it could also affect talents.
Yes.
The higher the difficulty would be. There's one problem with that, and that is that your difficulties are scaling upward, but your effect step is not.
Yes.
That your effect step is always willpower going up. And, that might be intentional. It might not. I always saw that as kind of a little bit of a mechanical weakness. The advantage to that, I mean, on the flip side, it's actually not willpower, it's a will force test. So once you picked up will force as a wizard at 6th circle, when you get will force at 5th or 6th circle, whatever it was in 1st edition, then you are suddenly adding a big boost on top of that. And that, because you can get increased talent ranks, that then starts the scaling.
Yes.
But I like the idea of making it a talent that gradually increases as you advance in circles. So your ability to dispel magic scales with your growth in your discipline.
Yeah. So I know I agreed with the changing it from a spell that had to have a matrix to cast it versus the I need to reattune on the fly, get this spell out, put dispel magic in, so I can't just do it. Whereas again, going back to the chef analogy, once I've studied this a little bit and I'm first circle, I should just kind of know this pairs well with that. This does not quite work. I can just deconstruct it over here. I agree with making dispel magic a talent instead.
So. Yeah. But people had questions about why did you make changes? Well, there is a notable change. There's why we made it.
Exactly. And it was not just because I wanted to. It made a game balance type sense to it as far as when you can scale that and when you cannot scale that, because one scales way early and Willforce comes along circles and circles from now. So that does take a while to get there. So 2nd circle discipline talent, Astral Sight.
Pretty straightforward.
Again, duh.
Wizards have gotten Astral Sight in like every edition of the game previously.
As they
obviously
should.
as they should. They get a spell that ties into it, and it's like, as while they are not necessarily concerned with astral space as an environment, they are certainly concerned with astral space as the source of the magical energy that they manipulate.
Yeah,
so
that's their...
being able to look at, obviously, if you are a scholar of magic and patterns, you need to be able to look at patterns in order to study them.
Yeah, that's the tool you're using.
It's kind of a no-brainer.
Yes, agreed. No doubt. 3rd circle, Tenacious Weave.
This is a new talent.
Yeah.
It was introduced with 4th edition. Because Dispel Magic is now a talent that scales, this is a talent that basically wizards learned to make their spells more difficult to dispel.
Everything you can do, I can do better. So
it's an arms race. In the same way that well, if you think about it, illusionists had talents all the way going back to 1st edition that allowed them to enhance the effectiveness of their illusions, right? Yes. That you had false sight and true sight, I think, were the names of the talents. Like one that enhanced raised the difficulty of sensing it was an illusion. Yeah. And then true sight was a talent that allowed you to more easily see through illusions. Yes. And so you had that kind of arms race, and it makes a lot of sense thematically to have a similar thing going on with just dispel magic and a talent that makes it harder to dispel magic.
I agree, because wizards are more like the chess champions than the guys over there playing checkers. So,
or something like that.
Something like that. So I agree with the whole, oh, I see what you did there. I'm going to do mine over here a little bit differently now that you can't. I can dispel yours, you're not going to be able to dispel mine. So yeah, I agree with the arms.
And you get that a little bit later on in your novice progression as you start to understand more of magic and be able to reinforce the patterns of your spells to be more resistant to other people disrupting them.
Yes. And I absolutely agree. Astral Sight should come at second circle and the Tenacious Weave should be at third.
Yeah. If you're not going to give Astral Sight to a wizard at first circle, which we couldn't really do with Dispel Magic, then you're going to give it to him at second. Therefore, sort of the Tenacious Weave. Again, looking at like, we've only got so many slots. Where are we going to put stuff?
Yep. And
I think that
either one of those an option, because this is the core of
obviously
as a wizard.
Right.
And then fourth circle, and then we get to the options. Fourth circle, Steel Thought, which I've always loved the name of, and I just love the fact that it's kind of like a mystic.
Yeah. Steel Thought in first edition was, I believe, weaponsmith only.
Yes.
And what it actually did was increased the user's mystic armor, which is kind of cool. And from the thematic build of the weaponsmith, in terms of looking back at them in first edition and the actual number of like defensive talents and abilities that they had, weaponsmiths were tanks.
Yes.
They were like, they were actually among, like, not necessarily from a damage soaking perspective. Like, they didn't have the raw durability damage numbers of a warrior or even a swordmaster for that matter. But the number of talents that they had that were like defensive and enhancement in nature in terms of being able to just stay standing was remarkable.
Yeah, they were a castle into and of themselves.
Yeah. But the weakness of the original version of Steel Thought, I always felt, was that because it enhanced mystic armor, there was only so much that it applied to, because spells didn't always do mystic damage. Correct. Many of them would do physical damage. Yep. A lot of like powers and effects and things like that would not be resisted if they were, especially if they weren't dealing damage. Mystic armor wouldn't affect them in any way, shape, or form.
Correct.
And unless you wanted to get in, and so the change to Steel Thought being basically the magic, the spell defense equivalent of a Void Blow, seemed to work really well in terms of the triumvirate there of a Void Blow, resist taunt, which is basically that for social defense targeting abilities, and then have Steel Thought. Okay, that'll be the one that affects mystic defense or spell defense, depending on your edition. That from a certain design standpoint, it makes sense. It allows it to be a bit more broadly useful. It does mean that it should perhaps be applied to other disciplines that would potentially have that kind of spell defensive ability. Spellcasters primarily. Absolutely.
And I agree with broadening it to just, instead of weaponsmiths only, it should go everywhere.
And so there's that, trying to like, so that was a choice that sort of had already been made going into fourth edition. I would think that there's actually some interesting potential design space if you were to go down a design road where instead of shifting Steel Thought to be what it is now, to maybe change how mystic armor could act and interact with abilities that target mystic defense, rather than maybe being in a Void Blow, perhaps acting as a penalty to like, or maybe or Nax or something where you could like have it act as a penalty against ability, like attacks that are targeting your spell defense, but not necessarily causing you damage, or granting you a bonus to resist these kind. Like, I think there's some potentially interesting design space there that an alternate design route, like 20 years ago, perhaps could have gone down. But it is where it is. I think it works. It works pretty well. And obviously, as again, the magicians, the magic users, it makes sense for that to be a core discipline talent for wizards.
I agree, because you should be able to use karma on attacks that are coming to you mystically. So I agree with that.
Well, and whether it's a discipline talent or an option, when we're talking about 4th edition, remember that you can use karma on any talents.
Yes.
So whether you could use karma on it or not was not a consideration in terms of whether something was discipline or not.
Yeah.
It was more a consideration of what really should be, what needs to be part of their toolkit to fit the core theme as we were constructing the 4th edition wizard as the preeminent, like, magic theorist, a fundamental understanding of magic as magic.
Yes. So I agree with all of those discipline talents. Done. So our options now are going to be the fun part. Arcane Mutterings, which
it's a social distracting talent. Wizards got the Arcane Mutterings, I think, in 1st edition. I think it's a talent that's always been kind of part of their shtick as being able to, like, creepy, bizarre, magically distracting, unsettling kind of like
we always
babbling.
We nicknamed that one a la peanut butter sandwiches from Mumford the Magician off of Sesame Street.
Yep. Okay.
So just because it's supposed to be confusing to literally stupefy your opponent, just they sit back and go, what? And then you blast them. So a la peanut butter sandwiches suffices for us. Awareness, which we talked about before, is a wonderful buffed version of perception.
Awareness is one of those that I think is one of the talents that is available to the most disciplines. If it is not given to somebody as a discipline talent, it is almost always available as an option.
Yeah.
Just because it is such a useful thing to have as a potential bit of your toolkit to be able to enhance your perceptive abilities. And it obviously, with their high perception and desire to study and analyze things, makes a lot of sense for a wizard to have it.
And I cannot tell you the number of times I've had players make a perception roll they needed to make to notice something, and they fail. So I appreciate that just about everybody gets awareness to help them out with that.
Yeah. That's a whole other topic that we don't have time for, but maybe we'll stick a pin in that.
Exactly. Yeah.
When we get to game mastering and talking about perception tests and things like that.
That's way down the list. So next up, book memory.
Yep, book memory. Again, that's something that it's a holdover. Book memory was available in 1st edition. It plays really strongly into the scholarly and intellectual themes of the wizard. Basically, their ability to memorize books and to have a lot of knowledge at basic recall. 1st edition kind of had the effects broken up across 2 talents.
Yeah, book recall.
It had book memory and then book recall. And I don't remember now because I haven't really looked at them in a while that like, I think book recall allowed you to keep books in memory for longer or something along those lines. But basically at this point, and this was done prior to 4th edition, but the effects of the 2 talents were more or less rolled in together in the course of discovering that, this is stuff that's kind of spread out a little bit. Let's just kind of consolidate to make things cleaner.
Yes, I agree with the consolidation of that entirely. Next up, conversation.
Because wizards talk. You kind of need a social talent in there, and you kind of look at the ones that are available, and the broadly useful social, like the most appropriate social manipulation talent is conversation. I think conversation might have been made into a talent in 3rd edition. I know it was a skill all the way back in 1st edition, but it's basically like, it is what it is. It's something that is useful if you're going with a more social, like academic type build, and it's the ability to sort of steer a discussion and shape things in that way.
Well, and even in one of the very first pre-gen adventures, Mist of Betrayal, you have to go talk to a wizard. He sends you out on your first adventure. So conversation should be part of that, because wizards are sought out because of their vast knowledge, prior research, and underpinnings of intellectualism, just looking at magical objects as well. And so, yes, they should be able to converse about those objects in a straightforward way to the lowest common denominator. Yes, this sword will help you defeat your enemies once you learn about its name. So little things like that, the wizard absolutely should have conversation. Creature analysis, again, lending toward the analysis aspect of what a wizard can do.
Yeah. The study and analysis and being able to look at something and understand it and to be able to draw correspondences and symbolism and things like that. You know, it is an sort of a intellectual analysis knowledge type ability, so it seems somewhat appropriate for it to be available to them as an option. Yeah. Probably something that would be more appropriate with a more of a hedge wizard type build, perhaps someone who would be out in the wilds and you know, more hinterlands kind of things, and maybe approaching from that stance. But it is still from a knowledge and analysis standpoint is pretty appropriate.
Oh, totally. Etiquette. And because if they're going to analyze how creatures affect the world or how magic actually works, they should realize that etiquette is the study of how people interact and the proper way of doing things.
But also, you know, within the context of academia and study and sage and knowledge, there is an etiquette that goes along with how that group
functions,
interacts, and what the rules of that culture are.
Great. So multi-useful.
But there are enough examples of not particularly personable wizards that it's not something that they should necessarily all have.
Yes, I agree. Because sometimes they're just too stuck in the books and forgot how to talk to people. Item history. And again, this is why people seek out wizards is...
Yeah, well, in first edition wizards, you had the hook for Miss Betrayal, which you mentioned, is that the group finds this magical amulet and they go to a wizard to learn about it, when in fact wizards, as presented in the core book in first edition, didn't actually have the ability to do that. Yep. They didn't have item history.
Nope.
So that was a little bit weird. That was something that was put in as an option in third edition. It makes sense, again, from a studying magic and being able to analyze patterns and stuff.
Yes.
There are probably wizards that would specialize in doing that, and item history is basically how that works. The use and advancement of thread items in Earthdawn is so fundamental to the game that making that talent available a bit more broadly to player character groups is very useful, as opposed to making it just troubadours, which means if you don't have a troubadour in your group, then anything that's not or a weaponsmith, then and again, first edition had item history and weapon history, different talents that basically did the same thing for troubadours and weaponsmiths. Just the weaponsmith version was more limited because it only allowed them to do that on stuff that they worked on. And it's like, why would there are some little differences between Great Leap and Lizard Leap, for example.
Yes.
But do we really need to have separate talents, each with their own slightly different rules, in order to do that? Again, from a simulating the world as it works kind of standpoint, I understand that. But from a gameplay, that's just like one more set of exceptions and different rules that you need to keep track of in your head.
Yeah, it was just nitpicky. And I agree with combining both of the leaps and item and weapon history, same damn thing. So next, clearly to go along with the scholarly aspect of wizards, we have read and write language and speak language.
Yeah, read and write language. Obviously, if you're going to be, delving into places and finding lost tomes of forgotten lore, you want to be able to you want to be able to read them.
Yes.
And the read and write language, talent allows you to do that.
Yeah.
And then speak language, again, that's a talent that is so broadly useful that it's worth making available to anybody where it seems like it would apply.
Yes.
Like anybody that has any kind of vague social situation, and even those who don't, probably could benefit from at least having it in their talent option list.
And I imagine a lot of wizards would just like to be that guy that can just walk in and go, yes, I can speak this language as well. And flaunt it that way, just to go, I have if you're talking about the broader culture of academia and symposiums and things like that, then, you may want to be able to communicate with your learned colleagues from other parts of the world who, don't speak the same language as you. So that's something that is worth getting. But again, we're there are more choices than you actually have slots. So are you going to be sort of a social academic type wizard that is going to be going that way? Or are you going to take a different path? Yeah, exactly. And of course, the last option is a standard matrix. Ta-da.
Yep. Because, you need to have a third one. What this does mean is that typically if you are going for as many spells as I can build, you will be typically taking the standard matrix as your optional talent at first circle, so that you can have 3 spells ready to go instead of just 2.
Yep.
But it's not strictly required, because there are actually some decent talent choices there. It's, I don't think, quite the no-brainer that it was under the 3rd edition design paradigm.
No, I do like making it a more difficult choice for the burgeoning character creation.
Yeah, it does mean overall that wizards and all magicians actually get fewer matrices as talents than they did in previous editions.
Yes.
That is kind of intentional to make the choices of which spells to have ready a little bit tougher. But you've got matrix items, which give you, that the same kind of flexibility, just with their own attached problems.
Yeah. So let's get to the 5th circle, discipline talents. And they're free talent, and this is the fun stuff. So I love hitting 5th circle when you finally get there, and with 4th edition you can get there a whole lot faster. But your free talent is, as you mentioned earlier, when your standard matrices gets upgraded to an enhanced matrix.
Yep.
And that'll hold a thread for them, right?
Yes. Yeah. The design question that we sort of asked was, do we want to give them an additional free matrix at that point, which kind of breaks the free matrix, the free talent at first circle is easy because it's always equal to the circle. But if we give them an additional talent for free at 5th, what rank does it at? Is it immediately at 5th? Well, that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, that just gets
right. Like, how do they suddenly get this all advanced? Well, if we did that, then we would have to maybe start it at 1. But then how do we do its advancement? Do they then have to pay to advance it? Because why would you want to have your free thing at, there's just a whole lot of how do we make this work and have it be any good questions that come to mind.
Difficult than it should have been.
Yeah. The solution to that being, well, okay, let's just make one of the free talents the free matrices that we gave them at first circle. So it'll still be rank 5, but it goes from being a standard to an enhanced. Then your free talents, when you get to Journeyman, you have 1 standard and 1 enhanced matrix. So that if you decide for whatever reason that you are not going with all the matrices all the time build, whether because you're going to be going with matrix items or whatever, then you still have an enhanced matrix, because enhanced matrices are really useful.
Awesome. Yes. And I just like the fact that you as a magician have evolved and your talents have grown more powerful and more useful. Why wouldn't one of your matrices? You could actually reweave that matrix per se in your magical theory behind the scenes, and you can just add to that and enhance it. Ta-da. Yay. So I like the natural progression of the evolution of one of your matrices to an enhanced matrix. That just is so simple. It makes so much sense. I applaud you, sir.
Their ability, Book Mage.
Yes.
For 1 strain, if they are looking at the spell in their grimoire, they get a +5 bonus to their thread weaving test to reattune on the fly. This does a couple of things. 1, it reinforces them as sort of bookish characters. It gives them a way to swap their spells out more easily in combat that is not available to the other disciplines, and also gives them a reason to be traveling around with their grimoire.
I was going to say, at the very least, it should remind the players, you have a spell book with you, don't you? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Yes, you do. And you should be using it.
And if you are bringing it out to reattune on the fly in the middle of combat, then you as a GM can do nasty things to it.
Exactly. Recruit that from scratch.
We'll give you a carrot while we hold the stick behind our back.
Exactly. Yes. This will be along the lines of the Game Master podcast a little bit later on. Things you can do to mess with your players.
And then the adept, the wizard may also spend a karma point at 5th circle, starting at 5th circle, to change the range of a spell from self to touch. Basically, what this means is that they have progressed far enough in their magical study that they can actually cast spells that are intended only for them, but to cast them on other people.
Yes, which is a beautiful thing, and sounds about the right place to do it at 5th circle.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yep. You get into that Journeyman-tier. And then we get the discipline talent, Astral Interference. This is another new talent. Wizards actually get a few new talents.
Which is very good.
that are, you know, again, like, let's develop some stuff that really makes them the masters of magic. Astral Interference basically allows the wizard dropping, basically making all spellcasting in the area more difficult. You're basically throwing down a jamming field to make it more difficult. Now, the cool thing, and we're not going to have time to actually get into spells that much tonight. No. We'll have to cover them another time. But basically, to counteract that, because it actually affects the wizard's own spells as well, wizard's own stuff, they get a spell called, I forget the name of it now, baseline subtraction, that basically allows them to ignore the effect of astral interference.
So yeah, Chewy jams transmissions, but ours are okay.
Right. But the thing is that the baseline subtraction works on any astral interference, just regardless of who might have thrown it down. So if basically, like, again, that's like an arms race between wizards. Wizards have an ability that makes it more difficult for people to cast spells in a certain area. Yes. Obviously, they are going to come up with something that is going to counteract that. Yes. So, you know, in this case, it just being a spell, because all you need to do is get rid of an existing thing. You don't need to, like, there's not necessarily any significant scaling with that you would need, like we kind of talked about with Dispel Magic.
Exactly. So at 6th circle, they get Will Force, which of course is the natural
no-brainer
buff to make your spells more effective.
Yep, that's the damage booster basically for spellcasters. Yes. Everybody gets it at 6th circle. Most of the other disciplines get a broad-based, useful in any circumstance, damage boosting talent at or very close to that same point. Yeah. Like Flame Arrow shows up at that same point, roughly. Like some of the other stuff as like damage boosting for melee combat all kind of shows up in roughly that same place for the most part.
And I don't know about,
and that's a no-brainer. Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but in my book, 7th circle, everything is bolded, which usually just
that's a
yeah. It's okay. Don't worry about it.
That's just a layout issue, and I don't think it got fixed for the revised printing that we did.
It's okay. It's one of the first typos I came across at all. So this deep into our podcast, I think we're doing pretty well. We've jumped around. Okay.
Yeah, discipline talent is Hold Thread. I'll be honest, this is a talent that even now causes me some consternation. It's a tough balancing act.
Yeah.
Because of the time commitment and the building power involved in weaving threads, and how for the most part you need to you need to bring the magical energies together so you can cast the spell, and if you don't, then they just kind of dissipate. You know, Hold Thread, the idea on that being that you should be able to, once you've gathered the energy and you have the threads ready, like hold on to them until you want to cast it, like to delay, like you can prepare the spell ahead of time and then delay the casting, and that has potential to be a little bit game bending, if not outright breaking, if not held carefully.
There is a strain component to that, however, so the longer you hold it, the more it hurts.
Well, yeah, there is a strain component to it. I've never really played a lot with like any of the previous iterations of Hold Thread, and I'm not sure how well this version works, to be honest. I have not played with it.
I haven't gotten to 7th circle, so I haven't gotten there either.
Yeah.
So I can't break it for you.
You know, that is something that I don't know. It's tough. I don't have a lot to say about it. It is something that should exist, but it was kind of hard. Still not necessarily happy
with how it turned out.
I'm still not happy with where it sits. Fair. Which is, you know, maybe a good sign that I am still growing as a developer.
It means that you're not 100% certain of all the decisions that have been made, and I'm okay with that. The fact that you can still reflect upon something and say, I don't think we're done tweaking, but this is as good as we could do at the time, because deadlines have to be met. So 8th circle, they get Suppress Curse, which I think is renamed from Abate Curse.
Yes, yeah, it was. So there's a couple of things going on here. One, Dispel Magic's scope is when it was shifted to be a talent at First Circle, got scaled back significantly, is that Dispel Magic explicitly only works on spells and talents. Yes. It does not work on other generic magical effects. Like you cannot dispel horror powers. You cannot dispel creature abilities, because Dispel Magic in earlier editions was very broad and very effective in terms of shutting down all sorts of stuff. Meanwhile, Abate Curse never seemed to be particularly useful if you weren't dealing with curses at all.
Yes.
Right? Like it only affected curses if you didn't have curses or cursed items in your game. Then the talent is just sitting there. It's not doing anything.
It did seem to be rather nebulous. Yes.
So what Suppress Curse does is it allows the talent user to temporarily, which is to say for the matter of a few rounds, to suppress or get rid of what are intended to be negative magical effects. Not only of spells, which it can do, but also horror powers, creature powers, anything like that, like, the penalty that you might get from a magical thing. So it is a little bit more broadly useful. It is something that allows you to affect, like horror powers and things like that Dispel Magic no longer can handle. Yes. And as a little bit more useful. But again, as the ability to manipulate and shape magic, it makes sense that wizards, when they get more experienced, can start dealing with stuff outside of the purview of traditional spell magic.
Fair. No.
Which is a lot of what they had been getting up to that point. Yes.
So I like the new iteration of wizards and the... We
haven't talked about Journeyman talent options.
Oh, right. Sorry. So
there's a lot to talk about. So their talent option list is they get Avoid Blow, defensive talent,
because a lot of magicians before did not get Avoid Blow.
Yeah, they get it. They get it as a talent option. I don't know how many would actually necessarily be selecting it, but as I talked about last time with the Air Sailor, we do, they don't get it until Journeyman because they are not physical combatants. They're not generally going to be up front kind of scrumming it up. Agreed. Generally. Yep. But we do like the idea of giving them access to defensive talents if they want them.
Yes.
So Journeyman, Journeyman-tier, that makes sense.
Every player who's ever played Magician in my game would take Avoid Blow in a minute. So I can answer that question. And then yes, Diplomacy.
Diplomacy, it's another social talent.
It goes along.
Yeah, kind of like etiquette. Diplomacy, I think, is just generally speaking, because of what it can do, is a it seems more appropriate as a Journeyman-tier ability for wizards. But again, it's another social. Looking at Gandalf. Gandalf was in some ways like a diplomat and dealt with stuff like that. So there's some of that in there.
And only because it's alphabetical, you get the option for another enhanced matrix.
Yeah.
So, duh.
This does mean that magicians only get 2 enhanced matrices total, unless they really go into like the enchanting stuff and like actually make enhanced spell matrix items, which is possible, yes. But they're not particularly common because it's a pretty big investment to make them. Yep. But again, like looking at generally speaking, that limiting the number of enhanced matrices makes those enhanced matrices and those pre-woven threads a little bit more valuable.
Yes. And
so it's
determine what you need up front. Have it in the back of your mind which spells you'd like to have ready in those matrices ahead of time. Plan a little.
Yeah.
So, and then evidence analysis to go along with the creature analysis.
Yeah, this is a long time wizard talent. They had evidence analysis in first edition.
Yep.
It is basically the Sherlock Holmes / CSI ability.
We've always called it CSI bar save.
Yeah, so where you are able through their power of logic and analysis and observation can take in a scene and figure out what happened from that sense. It's not something that is core to the wizard shtick now with their focus on magic, but it's a classic and it's a great talent, and so they have it as an option.
Along with Patterncraft, creature analysis, the fact that they can deconstruct something from what they see and trace it backwards.
Yeah.
Evidence analysis absolutely makes complete sense. No doubt about it.
Yeah. Oh no, absolutely. So, I mean, it's a no-brainer, but it's an option because there are better choices for them in terms of the theme as far as the discipline talent stuff.
Yeah. And then hypnotize.
That kind of goes along the lines of like arcane mutterings.
Mm-hmm. I'm here to confuse.
Like it's basically like the ability to manipulate minds and like mind control and stuff like that kind of goes along with certain ideas of wizardly magic.
Well, and it's the intellectual aspect as well to go along with the dazzling display of logical analysis. Their intellect is somehow going to overpower yours.
Yeah, I mean, hypnotize is more thematically along the lines of perhaps an illusionist talent.
I could agree with that.
Like if you could only pick one discipline to get it, probably it would be more appropriate to go to illusionist. But you will see, if you look at the options list, you'll see a lot of crossover between stuff because there's things that make sense.
I agree. So it works. And then Lifesight.
Lifesight is basically a boosted astral sight, or it is a focused kind of astral sight. Mm-hmm. It was originally in earlier editions Neithermancer only. There has been some scaling back and changes in terms of how astral sight works that actually makes Lifesight worthwhile now. So it's continues to be its own talent. And again, makes sense as an option. Because it's not necessarily something that all wizards would want to do, and they already do get astral sight as the discipline talent. So
Mystic Pursuit.
This was basically what was the original name, Direction Arrow.
Oh wow.
Was the original,
right.
Was the
from archers.
Yeah. So Direction Arrow was an archer talent in earlier editions that basically allowed the archer with a connection to their target to basically track them within a certain range. Yes. Right? They would basically fire an arrow and the arrow would point them in the direction of the target if they were within range and it was successful. We decided, because of the requirement for there to be like a not necessarily a pattern item, but some kind of
close object,
like correspondent object or something like that to make that connection, that it made sense from a thematic purpose to have it available to wizards. But obviously a wizard is not going to shoot an arrow into the air. Like the way that a wizard expresses that tracking ability is not going to work the same way as it does for an archer. And so consequently, it didn't make any sense for the talent, if we're going to be making it available to wizards and maybe one or two other disciplines as well, to call it Direction Arrow, because the arrow doesn't really come into play anymore. And it was like, I think it went through like 3 or 4 different naming iterations before we finally settled on Mystic Pursuit. That was Morgan and I have this joke that names are hard.
They are hard.
Like we can come up with the mechanics and the idea for a talent or a spell fairly easily, relatively speaking. I mean, balancing it can be tough, but like the basic concept, but coming up with a good name that is evocative of what it does, but also isn't like bland is difficult.
Oh, toss those to me. I'm pretty good at that.
Well, and so often what we'll have like in the mechanics section of like, for example, the Mystic Paths book, like the names of some of those talents and like the necks for stuff will have a really like silly name or something like that. And there will be a note on it, like needs a new name. Like, for example, to like the Sky Raider in the Journeyman, in the companion book has at 15th circle or 14th circle or something like that, this basically area effect lightning strike that does some pretty hefty damage. Yeah. The working title for that ability before we finally settled on a name for it was Big Ass Lightning Attack. Like that's what it was called in the draft book until we finally settled on a name. So Mystic Pursuit, it is not the best name, but it is the best name that we could come up with.
So you're talking Thunderstruck discipline talent?
Yes, Thunderstruck.
There you go. Easy song.
Well, yeah, that was eventually what I was like, oh, that's kind of cool, and it's like a little nod to like a little whimsical like reference or whatever.
Absolutely. I love those.
But yeah, Mystic Pursuit is basically Direction Arrow, but Yeah, but reskinned so that it is useful in other ways. And when we rewrote the talent description, we specifically said different disciplines use this in different ways. Archers fire an arrow into the air, you know.
Yes.
Like wizards might feel a tug on the item as the thread of connection pulls them where, you know, in the direction of the, like things like that. So that's the story behind Mystic Pursuit.
I'm okay with that. It's nice to know the occasional machinations in the background. So other than that, we have Power Mask.
Power Mask. What does that even do? Gosh, I'm flipping my books here.
Open.
Oh, okay. It allows the adept to disguise their magical nature from mundane and magical detection. So basically, they can hide the fact that they are an adept.
Ah, I am not the adept you're looking for.
Yeah. It might prevent people using Astral Sight or other magical detection abilities to detect that they are an adept or to detect magical effects that are on them.
Yeah, because that would be useful against the horrors, especially. That way they...
Yeah, horrors typically have high enough perceptions and magical detection abilities that they can probably see through it.
But if I have a really kick-ass
it's
roll.
Again, it's one of those... Yeah. It's one of those that was originally, I think, an illusionist ability that makes sense to make it available to wizards because of their mastery of magic, and their ability to shape and hide and conceal it.
I'm okay with that. 2 more to go. Resist Taunt.
There's your other defensive talent that they have not gotten just yet. Pretty straightforward.
Yeah. And I look at the intellectual aspects of it. This silly person is trying to get my goat up, or trying to get my shackles up, and I can intellectually just look at them, disarm them to go, everything you're saying is nonsense, and walk off. That's the resist taunt I see a wizard actually being able to pull off. And lastly, True Sight.
Yeah, True Sight. We talked about, sort of mentioned this earlier. True Sight is the ability to to more effectively pierce illusions. Which, you know, again, as
the scholar of magic,
as a scholar of magic, as a perceptive, again, kind of playing into the evidence analysis, creature analysis, like
Patterncraft. I can see how you did that.
Pattern recognition.
I can undo it.
You know, So they get True Sight as an option so that they have the ability to like pierce illusions because they can detect or note the weaknesses in its magical nature, or how its magical pattern might differ from what the pattern of the actual thing might be, or something along those lines.
I can deconstruct that, and I can see through this because I've learned more about this than you have. So I can totally see.
And again, it's not core, but it makes sense for it to be available as an option.
If you want to go down that path of being the uber intellectual wizard, by all means, this is your option to do so. That should give everybody some survival guide, wisdom on how to play a wizard more thoroughly, at least with the design aspects and your options for defensive talents, and exactly where you don't have to spend your points anymore is on your matrices.
Yeah, wizards tend to be the stereotypical smartest kid in the room. In some respects, when you're kind of approaching them, if you're going to be playing a wizard, and this is true of any spellcaster, but perhaps with a wizard most of all, is knowing what you've got and thinking ahead and planning and being just very like smart and analytical.
You are playing.
I mean,
chess.
It's not the only way to play them. But yeah, like you are, you know, you are it is a brain power thing in a way that is not necessarily the case for other magicians quite the same way. The wizards, again, trying to like the fourth edition build on them, focus on them being like bookish and analytical and, you know, studying of magic as magic and extending that study to everything, you know, that's, you know, any kind of magician. We talked about this in our spellcasting episode. Spellcasters in general are for players who really like to kind of plan ahead and see what their different tools can do. And I think the wizard like is the one that psychologically and intellectually like really gets into that more than the others. I mean, they all can, but that's like, you know,
these are more bent that direction already.
all magicians are like that, but wizards are like that even more.
Yes, to the nth.
Like wizards are the archetype of that. So
I agree.
we will probably have to do a separate episode talking about the spells that are available. 5 episodes on the 5 different kinds of spell lists for each of the. Yeah.
So we'll have a companion episode for wizards and their spells.
It probably will not be the next episode.
I guarantee it will not.
but we will get to those. But basically, like, final words for anybody that is considering playing a magician, but especially if you're playing a wizard, is to look at the spell lists and just, like, figure out what,
if you think those spells are cool, if you think you want to use those spells,
they would have.
That's the spellcaster I usually go with.
I mean, all of the spell lists are pretty cool.
They are. They're very well fleshed out.
I'm looking forward to the Magic Source book when we get that out, so that we can have more spells that are available. Because generally speaking, you don't play a magician unless you want to have a lot of spells and a lot of tools in your toolbox.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of disappointed that it is taking us as long as it is to get those done and to get that book out. But it's just the realities of, book development on top of day gigs and everything else.
And the spells are harder to do because of the mechanics behind them.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of balance issues that you need to consider,
threads,
because
range.
Well, I mean, those are fairly easy to ballpark based on the circle of the spell and the effect that it's going to be having. The problem is that because there is no real concept in Earthdawn of spell slots, that you need to be, when you're looking at designing spells, especially as we introduce, like, the extra threads mechanic, and that you need to make sure that there's really a reason for a spell to exist beyond just, it's this lower circle spell, just more. And so it is, you get to, it's a difficult thing to, it can be a difficult thing to work on, both from a balance and a conceptual standpoint and stuff like that.
You don't want to duplicate yourself and just rehash the same material.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Only supposed to be mindful that way. Okay. So, about an hour and 15 minutes in, not too bad for wizards. They are slightly more complex because of the nature of their spells and spell options, talent options. Sorry. So, other than that, folks, if you have any questions about how to play a wizard or why wizards are better than everybody else, because they are, feel free to email us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. Final thoughts, Josh?
Yeah, just, understand that we will be getting to the spells at some later date. So if you send questions about those, then we will probably bank those until that episode.
Exactly.
Spread the word, share the links, subscribe. Reviews are great. If you want to give us stars and comments, especially on Google Podcasts or Apple Podcasts, or
and ethically we cannot bribe
any place like that where that is an option, then please do so, and just continue spreading the word about Earthdawn. It is we're working and trying to get that get that word out there.
Yeah, as much as we can, as fast as we can, more product. And that's why this is a semi-official podcast. We're keeping the pulse alive on the lifeblood of... Yeah, never mind.
Keeping that flame burning.
Lost that analogy a while ago. Thank you much, everybody. Thank you, Josh, for taking the time. And thank you for listening. Now, go make your own wizardry legend.
Good night, everybody.